Hello. Today, it is still the first half of this week. The 10th November, 2021. Here we are in quite a monsoon. My purpose today for my English-speaking audience first, and then at the end of the week, I will do the same also for my French-speaking audience. My purpose is to present to you the explanations which have come through facts later on. Actually, years after that experience with the mother, in April 1975, that time during a near-death experience, what by now is a well-known phenomenon which has been studied, etc. Through my own research, I have found that the mother herself, during the course of the agenda, started mentioning some near-death experiences, which at that time were the first ones being mentioned on the media. And she had heard of one of them, and she mentioned it quite eagerly and with a lot of interest to Saprem, the disciple also from France in this lifetime, like herself, who had become her confidant, and thanks to whom we have the record of the agenda, and so the published volumes of the agenda afterwards. So it is to him that she mentioned that interesting story told by the man himself who had experienced it at that time. So when it happened to me, that was 75, and there was no agenda published yet that could confirm something like this near-death thing. I would not have been able to give a name to the kind of experience I had gone through, just that I have lived it, just the way I told you. And that I knew very well the reason why I had escaped impending death was that call from my soul itself to the mother at the very moment of finally total annihilation of my being, or at least of my external being. And this is when the inmost being, what's the terminology adopted by Aurobindo and the mother called my psychic being, the being of my soul. Came in front, came out of its depths, and of course, had the immediate move that was needed to solve the whole thing, to call the mother. And again, the very intensity of the experience kind of propelled me. This time in a dimension inward. And suddenly what seemed to be the black hole became the very door. It was the black hole of depth, of disappearing. I mean, it turned into the door to that other dimension, which secretly is there, but we have no idea. And at that time, I had no idea. I knew that my soul, my psychic being, the being growing from the initial spark of my soul and growing more and more as it could from lifetime to lifetime become stronger, more and more able to intervene in my life, to bring about the needed solutions, the needed actions, reactions from the outer parts of my being. But I had understood from the little I knew then that this was only something personal, the space of our psychic being, kind of in an invisible space, in our inmost depths. Not in the physical realm, but in a more subtle dimension of reality. Now, a few years later, I was becoming more acquainted with something which had been very fascinating for me from my very arrival in Aurobindo, which was Savitri, the huge, incredible poem by Aurobindo. But I was, because of my very poor English, I was quite unable to go through it at that time. So I knew almost nothing about it. Only there were some passages of it which the mother had selected herself, some lines here and there. And she had read them aloud for being recorded. And this musician from the ashram itself, Sunil Bhattacharya, in whom she had found such a talent for not only composing music, but receiving the inspiration for it from her, from the subtle realms which music descends actually from. And she had asked that Sunil to compose music little by little for those passages she had read out. As an overall structure, the immense poem called Savitri is around the life of one ancient incarnation of the mother in the much earlier times of India itself. And it was thanks to the ardent call of Ashwapati, the king Ashwapati, who, in spite of being a king, not an ascetic somewhere in the forest, not an hermit somewhere, he had remained a king and was still at the head of his kingdom and taking care of everything that needed to be taken care of. But at the same time, within, secretly, he was a great youth. And his consciousness had been able to visit so many of the hidden dimensions of reality. And he knew of the existence of the Divine Mother. And he was so aware of the plight of humanity, of the difficult task which is ours here, to go on with so many impossibilities in our lives. And at the same time, so many beautiful dreams, ideals, which seem to be totally vain, futile. But he knew those dreams were inner certitudes of the soul, which did exist in some higher realms and were meant to be realized at some point when evolution would go further on Earth itself. But human beings, as we are now, we are not the one who would really embody fully the future beings who would follow us in evolution. But at least we were meant to prepare the way as best as we could. And his heart was paining, hurting for humanity. And he decided to try and reach the Divine Mother herself on her supreme plane of existence, and to ask her for help. And he did. And the mother promised that indeed she would come down to help. She would incarnate. And help in a decisive manner. The situation of humanity on earth, preparing the way for the bright future to come later. This is how Ashwapati, King Ashwapati, and his wife, who had been childless until then, they received the wonderful gift of a baby girl, whom they named Savitri, a name which has to do with the sun word. Which can redeem the world. And then in the story we have told magnificently, book after book within the entire poem. The books, the 12 inner books within Savitri are themselves divided into cantos of various sizes. And the whole of the second book, which is the largest, the longest of all, is dedicated to the description of King Ashwapati, the great yogi, going from dimension to dimension, from plane of reality to another plane. I will not go, of course, into the details of all this. But after Ashwapati looking for the abode, the utmost abode of the Divine Mother, has gone through the lower worlds. The lower worlds are not very pleasant to visit, to go through. They are the closest to the earth, and they don't receive yet the higher light and love and power from the higher realms. So after he has finished visiting those worlds, which correspond as entire planes of reality with their own beings and forces and existences and influences on earth and on humanity. There is a subtle physical, there is a vital world where our life energy here comes from. And then the ordinary mind world, plane of existence. And this is all so unsatisfactory. A longing in the king grows more and more to attain something of the truth, of the real truth of things. And then in the book 2, Canto 14, I was able one day to discover more and more of that entire passage. Thanks initially to the lines read out by Mother, and which I had heard her reading out. Along with the music composed by Sunil specifically for that passage and those lines. And this is how I discovered the Canto 14 of the book 2, to which Aurobindo gave the title, extremely significant immediately, of the world soul. And it is, it's not a long canto at all, it's just a few pages, but of course I'm not going to read them entirely to you. So I will paraphrase, tell you a little bit what it is. And the interesting thing is that indeed it is kind of hidden in the background of the other worlds. And when Ashwapati had was going out, you see, from the world of ordinary mind, with that longing in him, that longing probably an answer from that hidden world, kind of in the background of everything, in a deeper mode of existence than those other worlds. And I was reading as I could. And then I discovered some lines which sounded pretty much like what I had felt during my NDE in 75. It was a description of a whole landscape made of soul stuff. Everything, all the beings, the rivers, the valleys, the flowers, the whole scenery. Everything in that world was made of soul substance. And so that world did exist, exactly as I had discovered it at a time when I had no idea where my consciousness had gone. which was obviously not just my own psychic being space, individual space. Well, there exists a whole dimension of reality which is connected to that, as you will see. And I discovered that this had also an obvious relation to the fact that it was in a near-death experience that I had somehow found the access to that dimension, to that world, which is the world soul. Because Aurobindo has about 1 or 2 pages then explaining that there are resting in that space all the souls, actually the psychic beings of the spirits which have volunteered to come on earth to incarnate. And during the whole cycle of their incarnations on earth, when the psychic being withdraws from the body, well, after the death, the psychic being comes there and are taken care of and have their resting place, their individual resting place, like in chambers, you see, at the exactly correct level that is required for their own level of growth, of development, and under the care of the beings who belong permanently to that world soul. So of course I didn't stay there because it was not really the moment of my death. And I guess I found myself there because it is a mother that I called. So that propelled me, that call from my psychic being, made me found her deep in that world. And did Aurobindo mention also that the mother was there? Yes. And she is indeed at the very center of that realm. And it is from there that the whole renewal of all the souls involved in the manifestation of the circumstances of their future rebirth in other bodies under other names, in other places of the physical world, is being prepared in the best, what I would call, script for the next life that those psychic beings now resting for a length of time, which depends also entirely on each soul's becoming a way of development. All this is adapted uniquely to the unique needs of each soul, of each psychic being. So this is a place where we will go, all of us who have chosen at some point to enter the cycle of evolution on Earth. So I was there only briefly, but so significantly, because I also met the mother in the form that I could recognize her in. And I remember and relate to when my consciousness would go back to the surface reality we are usually aware of only. Now, all these points I was able to verify from the very lines of Aurobindo in those few pages. One more detail, which seemed a bit imaginary, perhaps, in the way I experienced myself while being in that other dimension. You may remember that in my subtle vision with my eyes closed, I saw myself as a little girl, who, as soon as she saw from afar the mother there waiting for her, started running towards her. Well, it is more in mother's own agenda, much later, from 78 on, the recordings done patiently, week after week. Every time he would meet the mother, normally twice a week, a recording would be made. And very often, what mother mentions to Satprem is the observations she has made about the death of one or the other of the disciples in the ashram who have left their body in such and such circumstances, etc. And I found out that one example which comes to my mind immediately, I think it was Satprem's own brother, a doctor, if I remember well. And he was also, after his death, because he was still in contact with his brother, and his brother had already developed enough psychic being to, and the brother's soul had been attracted and had chosen to stay within the aura, so to say, of his brother. And the mother was able to see that and to mention that to Satprem. And in the case of an older Shramite who had left his body, mother saw him even as a baby, very happy baby. was so glad actually to have gone out of this old body. And it was, anyway. And so there are quite a few examples. And that confirms that the psychic being, especially when one sees it oneself, one's own psychic being, it is quite common that it will appear under the form of a child, more or less young, more or less already advanced in age. So that also confirmed that strange detail in my experience. I don't know if you can see that today I have quite deliberately changed the place in what is actually my little research office. It is just downstairs in the same building where Aurobindo has given me. It's a place where I live also, and do yet also a part of my work, which of course, being this integral yoga of evolution, it happens all the time, not just in the office, from 9 to 5 or anything like that. And it is not anything like a religion either. It's not any question of ceremonies happening on certain days and certain times. Of course, in every religion, you will have some really awakened souls who will start individually living something similar to a yoga. And the process fills up gradually all their life. But until now, also the body has been influenced by what's happening at other levels of the being, under the influence of the soul. The body could not be expected at all to participate out of its own choice. This additional incredible possibility is one of the main things that the evolutive work done by Aurobindo and the mother have massively introduced in what is now becoming possible. And it is one of the main points which need to be insisted upon, because they are so new and so incredibly promising for the future of our very bodies. So I have changed the place within my little office downstairs from the sofa where I usually sit to another corner of the room, so that you could have an idea about the little research library, which I have for my own direct use. Over the years, my personal interests and growing capacities have made me somehow a specialist on certain topics. And this is what I can help other people, if they are interested, to elucidate and to whatever. But I'm not a teacher in the intellectual sense of the word. I am mostly an example. And as much as possible, simply a transmitter of the energies that have been already awakened in my own being by the divine grace, and which can be useful for others as well. But over the years, besides the overall specialized library, quite large, which also exists for this kind of work. Under the name of the Laboratory of Evolution, the unit I was led by the divine once again to start to found in 1984, and under which I am still able to live and do all aspects of this integral yoga of all my life, without having to do any other specific outer work, which is for me a pure blessing, because part of my work is also to document as much as possible in which way the cellular consciousness aspect is intermingled with the progress of all the other parts of the being. So Sri Aurobindo has actually written many books. And what is known is only what has been really published, which people in the world are mostly aware of, is only a part. A lot exists, which is fantastic too, but which he has not even revised because of his own constant progress ahead. And when he knew that he would have to leave his body at the end of 1950, the only book he very actively revised and completed as much as possible was precisely that immense epic poem on evolution through the story of Savitri. The only other book he actually wrote during that period was at the request of the mother for the inmates of the ashram. In those late years, around 48. The mother started in the ashram the physical education department, something which was quite unknown of in other ashrams. Those who had any concern for the physical body were doing it mostly in the form of asanas and this more traditional way of dealing with the body. But certainly not all the ordinary sports. So in the ashram, people were quite puzzled as what was the ultimate purpose of this new development in this ashram. So the mother had asked Sri Aurobindo to write something. And Sri Aurobindo started writing what he titled the supramental manifestation upon earth. And this book outlines in a most significant and magnificent way all the changes concerning the body itself that we can start expecting to happen one way or the other. When the supramental manifestation, which I tried to explain during my videos, was what Sri Aurobindo was working on and what he wanted precisely to complete by leaving his body when nobody knew yet but himself and the mother. It is I mention this fact because they give an idea of the importance, those two books, Savitri and the supramental manifestation upon earth. And in Savitri also, there are incredible lines concerning directly the body and itself becoming more and more conscious, participating in the whole development of the being towards its life divine, with a conscious body, participating willingly out of its own free will in all itself. So the cabinet with glass, which you can see in this area, is full of the books by Sri Aurobindo himself, from the early years to when he had to leave his body. And then I am sitting just next to this much smaller cabinet in which are simply I am not sure if you will. Another time I'll show you the inside. This little cabinet is also filled with a treasure. All my volumes of the agenda, Mother's agenda, which are a fundamental treasure for anybody who wants to care for their body and itself. For Mother too, it was a totally new exploration, totally new work. I hope you can see enough there in this corner. This is a huge book with photos of the Mother. And this is the cover. I cherish that book because the photos are, it's a big book. So the photos, especially of the face of the Mother, are kind of life size. And most of them look straight into your eyes and your soul and smile to you. I hope this new talk will be a help for all of you who have listened to it or are going to listen to it. To understand and feel better who the Mother was and still is. Next week, be prepared to another surprise. The divine is not only love, but also laughter. And already through all my previous videos, you may have started getting quite a hint of that. Well, rendezvous if you are interested next week again around the first few days of the week. In the meantime, Om.